Welcome to Rights and Remedies, the podcast where we explore the law, the fight for justice, and healing. I'm Allison Mahoney, your host and a lawyer dedicated to fighting for the rights of survivors of domestic and sexual abuse, as well as children harmed by the child welfare system. Each week, we delve into legal battles and court cases, share powerful stories that demand change, and spotlight the cutting-edge practices that are helping victims on their journey to healing. So, if you're ready to dive into the intersection of advocacy and healing, subscribe to Rights and Remedies today. New episodes are released weekly, and we can't wait to have you join the conversation. Together, we can make a difference. Welcome back to Rights and Remedies. Before we begin today's episode, please be advised that we'll be discussing cybersexual abuse in today's episode, which may be triggering for some listeners. If you need to take a break or skip this episode, please do so and prioritize your own well-being. And then I'd like to introduce today's guest, Lindsay Lieberman. She's the founder of Lindsay Lieberman LLC. She's a friend, a colleague, a brilliant lawyer. Welcome, Lindsay. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Allison. I'm so happy to be here.
So to start, can you just explain to the listeners what you do? What do you do at your company?
First and foremost, I'm an attorney, and my firm represents victims of sexual violence, domestic violence, and also cyber abuse. So I am a victims' rights attorney, and I handle all sorts of cases in that realm. And in addition to practicing law, I also do some prevention work where I'll go into organizations and law enforcement agencies and do education and some prevention work.
That's amazing. I have a lot of questions for you. First of all, how did you get into this field? You and I are both pretty niched and focused on victims' rights issues, and I always think it's interesting to hear people's journeys. So, what drew you to this work?
Yes, I love that we have that in common, and it allows us to commiserate and also work together on cases and issues. I have always been drawn to representing victims of sexual privacy violations since I was a child. There's something that's always drawn me to standing up for this very vulnerable population of people in need. As a girl and then a woman, I can also share that I've had my fair share of privacy violations, as I think most girls and women can say they have. And so there's something about having the opportunity to speak up for people who've experienced these sorts of harms and help them to find their voice and find some empowerment and justice that has always been something that I've wanted to do.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm the exact same way. I mean, my whole legal career has been dedicated to representing victims, and it's nice to have work that feels so purposeful, and it's dark subjects. Like we're dealing with a lot of trauma, or are exposed to a lot of trauma in our work, but there's something to be said for doing something that has the potential to really, really help a person, and especially at a point where they're dealing with potentially the most traumatic thing they've ever faced in their life.
Yes, agreed. I mean, it's really meaningful work. And I don't know about you, but during law school, like I was never thinking I was going to go wind up at some big firm working on doc review for 15 hours a day. It was just never in my plan. I was
Yeah.
never interested in that. But to do meaningful work that we really help people, I mean, there's nothing better.
I agree. I did work in big law for a little while, but I took on as many pro bono cases as I could while I was there. And even from the moment that I went to the firm, my plan was always to go into social justice work of some sort afterwards.
There's nothing wrong with big law. You obviously got tremendous skills and experience from
Mhm.
working at the firm that you worked at. So I think that's fantastic too.
Yeah, thank you. Um, and where do you work?
I'm licensed to practice law in New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and I'm currently applying to practice law in Washington, D.C. I
Okay.
practice in federal states and federal courts. So I can take cases all over. And in terms of my prevention consulting work, I can do that all over the country.
Okay. Incredible. I waved into DC a few years ago. It takes a while. People think that it's a very quick process to wave into different jurisdictions, and I've done it 3 times now, and every time it's like almost a year.
It's a lot of paperwork.
Yes.
Remind me, which states are you licensed in?
New York, that's where I took the bar exam, and then I waved into DC, Colorado, and Illinois. Colorado is the fastest, but DC and Illinois both took. I want to say it was close to a year, and Colorado even with that, it was like 10 months. So, anyways, you'll get there, and DC will be very lucky to have you as a barred attorney in the state or in
Thank
the jurisdiction. Um, can you talk a bit about the prevention work and why you added that on as a service at your firm? Why was that important to you?
My whole career also has been dedicated to helping survivors, coming in after the fact and helping individuals try to navigate what life looks like after assault, after abuse. So I started off as a prosecutor where I handled sex crimes prosecutions and crimes against children. Then I worked in another civil firm doing victims' rights. And then I had my first daughter in 2019 and subsequently a second daughter. And having my kids sort of, it reinstilled and re-inspired me, solidified my passion for helping survivors and for coming in and doing that work that I've been doing. But it also motivated me to try to find a way to get ahead of these
Yeah.
horrible things that I was seeing happening. And I felt inspired to try to make the world a little bit safer for my kids after seeing the atrocities that I see happening online and at school and to young children. And so for the past few years, I've been splitting the work between legal practice and consulting work and really enjoying being able to be in both of those worlds, trying to make a difference.
That's incredible. I think your daughters will be very proud of you when they're old enough, or they'll express that when they're old enough to express that. I know they're young right now. And so with the prevention work, is that mostly in schools or where are you focusing your efforts in that space?
Well, schools are a critical place to have this education, but I'm finding that in addition to providing it in schools, it's also been very popular amongst parent groups.
Mm,
So parents don't understand the full extent of the harm that is possible on the internet, and they don't necessarily think that all of those terrible things that they've maybe heard of could ever happen to them or their kids or their families.
got it.
And finding parent groups, both online and in person, are really appreciating the information that I can provide. And it allows them to start connecting with their kids and teaching their kids safe cyber practices and encourages more open dialogue between the parents and the children about these things. And I found that that's like a really great place to be spreading this information. It seems much appreciated.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And I think that especially with the cyber abuses, there's something that we're hearing more and more about in the media. But I think it's easy for people to think like that doesn't happen to my family or to the people in my life. What are some of the main things that parents need to be worried about and aware of in thinking about how to protect their children?
Well, it used to be that parents could tell their kids, don't post things online that you don't want your grandma to see, or don't ever take naked pictures of yourself. And all of those things are fine and helpful. But now, the way technology has developed, bad actors can actually take your kid's face and attach it to a naked person's body and create an artificially intelligent, a deep fake, use artificial intelligence to create fake media of your child performing in a sexual act or performing in pornographic material.
And why would someone do that?
It's a great question, Allison. It's disgusting. It's criminal in some jurisdictions and will be criminal in more. People do it for a whole bunch of reasons. Some is for malicious intentions. If somebody wants to hurt another person, they might attack them in that kind of way. And it's consistent with some of the cyber abuse that we see generally. And also amongst the younger generation, we're seeing kids think it's funny or they're bored or they're like developing their technological skills and trying out new things, and they're not realizing or conscious of the devastating effects that their conduct can have on other people.
Right. And children's brains are still are developing still, and we can't expect them to evaluate situations in the same way that adults would. So you had mentioned that you were a prosecutor, a sex crimes prosecutor, right?
Yes.
And can you talk about the difference in the types of sex crimes that you saw when you were a prosecutor compared to now, where we're in this world where there is this rapidly evolving set of cyber abuses?
Yes. When I was prosecuting cases, most of them were in-person sexual assaults. A few of them involved evidence from somebody's cell phone, like text messages that confirmed the details of the crime, but most of them were just in-person assault. And these days, so many of the sex crimes that are being prosecuted are these cyber sex crimes. So an example of that is the in-person assault happens and the perpetrator records it and has a recording of his rape or sexual abuse on his phone, and then maybe goes and shares it with other people or publishes it on a pornography site. And it adds a whole other component to this crime. There's the in-person abuse, and then there's this cyber component.
Right. It's really wild to think about the fact that so much has changed in a relatively short period of time. You know, we're talking within the span of a decade, if that even. And I know you and I have talked about the unique harms that victims face when they're victimized in this way, when they're victims of cyber abuses or technology facilitated abuses. There's so many different terms now for how to describe this. But one of them is that it's really severe and pervasive because once it's online, it doesn't go away, or it takes a long time to go away. It can spread rapidly. But can you share a bit more about how you think victims are uniquely harmed when they're victims of cyber abuses?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, once content is up on the internet, it's extremely challenging, if not impossible, to fully remove it.
Yeah.
There's always the chance that if, let's say, a video of you was posted online without your consent and you do get it down, we can't ever know who had access to it while it was posted. So oftentimes, a lot of my clients, they go through their lives every day, as we all do, but they always have in the back of their mind the possibility that that video could resurface, that at any possible day they could Google their name or they could get a message from somebody from their past and it can say, I just saw that video of you.
Mhm.
So it's this heavy burden on these individuals that lasts, permanently. And there's been really drastic, horrific outcomes from cyber abuse cases because the anxiety and depression and humiliation is so intense.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that kids are victimized in this way also. And so when you think about that threat hanging over your head, that's a long time if it's from childhood all the way through adulthood, potentially. Uh,
Exactly. And another reason why it's so important for parents and schools and law enforcement to all be having these conversations with kids so
Yeah.
that if something happens, the kid knows that there are people that they can go to get help, that he or she can go to his parent and they're not going to get in trouble. They're not going to have their phone taken away. They're going to be helped. They're going to be supported and they're going to have options. And that's really critical to avoid those drastic, tragic outcomes.
Are you doing any preventative work with adults?
Yeah, I've spoken to community groups based out of libraries, and I've had nonprofit organizations bring me in to talk to their communities and groups because these cyber crimes are happening to people of all ages. And in some ways, the older generation is even more vulnerable to cyber abuse and scams. And so that cyber literacy is really important for anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, the scams, some of them look so real. I got an email the other day, it was a week or two ago, that I thought was real, where it was like a PDF of a letter and it had a picture of the door across the street from an old apartment building that I lived in. And they had all these threats in it saying, like, we have images of you and blah, 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 even though there aren't images of me floating out there, as far as I know. And for a moment, I was really afraid. And then I talked to a private investigator who I work with on cases, and they said that this is just a widespread scam, and a bunch of people are getting these letters as the result of data breaches,
Yep.
which, and you and I work in this space, but I can only imagine what someone would feel if they were totally unfamiliar with this world.
Um, Yes, they're widespread, but also they're quite embarrassing. So people don't
Mhm.
talk about them openly. So
Yeah.
even though a lot of people are receiving them, they make people very scared and sometimes like ashamed because maybe there is a secret or there is a picture and there isn't a lot of like discussion or awareness about you. But even I have gotten emails and been like, oh, is this real? And it takes a few
Yeah.
minutes because you're very vulnerable when you get confronted with something like that. It's very scary.
And you feel like you don't have any control, which
Right.
is how our clients feel like they have no control over the situation.
Exactly. And that is a big component of the work that I know you do and that I do, which is helping our clients to regain some sense of control over their lives, some sense of power to make decisions for themselves, for their future, for how they want justice to look. And I think that that's, really one of the best things that you and I do.
Yeah, I agree with you. You and I have both talked about the importance of having a trauma-informed practice, a trauma-informed law firm, and also to specialize and to have a resource for potential clients where the lawyers focus exclusively on victims' rights work. Can you talk a bit about why it's important to have a trauma-informed and specialized practice?
Absolutely. So it's true. You and I are very niche. We have very specific subject matters and skills, and that allows us to do our jobs really, really well. Then there's a lot of like general personal injury attorneys out there that handle all sorts of cases, and they are wonderful attorneys. They're doing slip and falls and dog bites and auto accidents, and they're doing a great job at what they do. But we're finding that more and more of these general attorneys are potentially taking on or trying to take on these cases where you're looking at the kinds of crimes and harms that you and I are talking about, these very personal, invasive sexual privacy violations in person and online. And these cases are so sensitive, and the subject matter is so sensitive. And in order for a client to really have a fully positive, empowering experience, they need to have an attorney who understands the issues and they need to have an attorney who is trauma informed, because trauma informed, understanding and being compassionate of the trauma that they have faced and continue to face allows the attorney to connect with the client in a totally different way and to prepare the client for court and for testimony in a totally different way, and to be sure that that client walks away from this experience, whatever happens, better off than they did before they came to the attorney's door. And that's something that you and I and other, specialized attorneys can offer. And you're just not seeing it at those big general firms.
Right, right. Well, and your years as a prosecutor are especially valuable because so many of these cases also have a criminal component, whether it's just working with law enforcement to investigate the case or alongside the prosecutor's office. And so, because you were an assistant district attorney for so long, you have really unique insight into that world for clients, which I would imagine is quite important to the people who you're working with.
That's right. I think it's great that I have experience both in civil court and also in criminal court because it does allow me to have a larger understanding of all of the different players and how the courts interact and different tracks towards obtaining justice, which is my goal for all of my clients.
Yeah, that's incredible. Incredible, Lindsay. You had mentioned before the word empower and why it's important to empower clients. Litigation is hard. You and I both know this. It's a draining process for our clients, or it can be. How do clients achieve a sense of empowerment if they're going through litigation?
I think it's an ongoing conversation between an attorney and the client, and it's also a mindset.
Yeah.
And, if a survivor is in litigation, whether that's criminal or civil or family court, it means that they said something. It means that they stood up
Hmm.
and attempted to hold their assailant accountable. And that in and of itself is empowerment.
Yeah.
And because of the way our society is and the patriarchy that we live in, so often people are afraid to even speak up, to even report what happened. And that's understandable. So if you're in litigation, you are already holding that person accountable to some extent. And it is a matter of continuously reminding yourself about how important what you're doing just by speaking up is. It
Hmm.
reminds me of that case in France where the victim of the big criminal trial, where her husband was drugging her and inviting strangers over to
Yeah.
rape her, she refused to be anonymous in the trial. She wanted to be publicly named, and she's made all these statements because she realizes and has said it's not the victim who should feel ashamed, it's the perpetrator.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anonymity is amazing for survivors, and it's a tool that
Yeah.
we use often. But victims shouldn't feel ashamed. Victims should feel empowered. And, hopefully this woman in France going public will help inspire other survivors, not necessarily
Right.
to go public, but to stand up, to speak out, and to try to obtain justice for them, their cases, and for all women and girls. We're all in
Yep.
it.
Yep. I could not agree more. And I've seen the same thing. I think there's a huge benefit to being able to sue anonymously for especially for safety reasons, but there is such value in feeling heard and controlling the narrative. And because oftentimes abusers, you and I know this, they twist the story. It's like the tables are turned and all of a sudden they pretend to be the victim in some way, which is crazy making. But to actually speak up and explain in a complaint or court documents, this is what happened to me, there is something very empowering about that.
Absolutely. And even if a survivor decides to talk to a lawyer and then says, you know what, this isn't for me, I'm not ready to file the complaint, that's okay too. And having that conversation and at least just understanding what their options are with that and understanding that they don't have to take action, I have found that that in and of itself can really empower survivors. And that's, something that you and I can offer. I think a lot of people are afraid to call lawyers because they
Yeah.
assume that it's scary or intimidating, or if they say what happened, they'll be forced to take action. There's a whole host of reasons.
Right.
So I think it's important to get that word out that you always have options, and finding out information is always going to help you. because then you make the decision based on information you have, and you're not making a decision out of desperation or a lack of information and knowledge.
Right. And a lawyer can provide a lot of details about the different types of claims, different options available to someone. That's something I also always say to potential clients is that essentially this is a moment where you start to take charge of the situation and understand what your choices are, and then you decide what you want to do and what's best for you. Because the client is the one who knows what's best for them. No one else does. It's easy to look at someone and kind of judge their situation and think, oh, yeah, this is what they should do. But in the case of victims' rights work, it's so important for the client to be the one directing what happens, the course of action.
100%.
Yeah. Anyways, well, Lindsay, thank you so, so much for sharing all of this information. I absolutely love what you're doing. I know you're a phenomenal lawyer. We've worked together, but I think that the preventative work you're doing is so important. And I think that you can help so many people all across the country and hopefully make a major dent in preventing a lot of these abuses from even happening. Just in closing, what's a message that you would give to someone who has recently been victimized, who's been a recent victim of a cyber abuse? What are some of the first steps that they should take to start to put themselves more in the driver's seat?
I think the most important thing to say is that oftentimes when somebody sees evidence that they've been the victim of a cybercrime, it's usually a naked picture or a naked video or something that's, online or has been messaged to you. Our instinct is oftentimes to delete it and get rid of it. It's so frightening and shocking that we want it off of our screen. And my advice is avoid that. Avoid that at all costs. You're going to want to, but actually what you really want to do is save it. You want to preserve the picture or the email or the video, whatever has happened that is so alarming to you. That's evidence. And that's the evidence that you want to have so that you can preserve your options, so that you can go to the police or call a lawyer or go to family court and get an order of protection. So do not delete, save everything. I always encourage people to reach out and talk to an advocate or an attorney as soon as possible, because timeliness is always a factor in these cases. So, seek out mental health care, seek out advocacy. You can research local domestic violence organizations and try to have some conversations to figure out what you want to do.
Lindsay, where can people find you? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, I am on Instagram, Lindsay Lieberman, ESQ. My website is lindsaylieberman.com. I have a newsletter. I'm on LinkedIn. Google me, follow me, reach out if you have any questions at all. If you want to bring me into your community group or college, sorority, fraternity, I'm happy to come and chat and talk to all of you.
And as someone who does follow Lindsay on social media and who receives her newsletter, she provides a lot of helpful information and tips. So definitely sign up and follow her if this is an interesting topic to you. All right. Thank you so much, Lindsay. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Allison. So happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us on Rights and Remedies. I hope today's episode gave you valuable insights into the legal issues facing victims and the pathways to healing. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Whether you're a survivor, an advocate, or someone looking to learn more, we're here to support and empower you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. You can also follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at ALM Law LLC for updates, resources, and more. Until next time, take care and remember that together we can make a difference.